All right, well, what's up, guys? We're back at it again with another podcast with The Way, and today's a heavy one, another heavy topic that we're covering, and Feji is joining us. He's a leader at The Way and actually a shepherd here, and so he's joining us. Feji, thank you for being here. And he's here via FaceTime, I believe, right now. So he's not physically present, but he's definitely here in spirit, and we're glad that you're joining us. But before we dive in, we do have our inaugural dad joke. So, have y'all seen the meme, the Walking Dead meme? You know, the one where he's bending beside his son,
like Carl. Okay, yeah,
the Carl meme.
Yes,
but he's wearing a mask in this meme, and he's been down by us, and he says, "Son, it's not a mask." And Carl goes, "No, Dad, don't." And he goes, "It's a coffee filter." It's a coffee.
Oh my God.
Get it?
That's pretty bad.
I do like those memes, man.
No, Dad, don't. It's a coffee filter, son.
Oh, Carl, no.
3 seasons of that show, and then just never watched another one. It's crazy.
Wow, I'm still
It's a good show.
I'm still deeply devoted to that show.
Now I'm too far behind.
Season 10. It's pretty crazy.
So today, if you haven't seen it, we're going to be discussing the Ahmaud Arbery case, and specifically use that kind of as a springboard into the deeper issue of racism as a whole. And so if you haven't seen it, there's a video that surfaced, what was this, about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago now?
Yeah, like 2 weeks.
So,
2 weeks probably.
So the video surfaced. It actually happened a couple months ago.
February.
But the video is a clip of you see Ahmaud wrestling with a white man that they had pulled up in the truck to citizens arrest him, and he was on a jog, and they end up shooting him twice. The guy he was wrestling with end up shooting him twice, and you see him fall over unconscious and ends up taking his life. And so very, very sad, tragic situation. But it has and I have, since we talked a couple days ago, I've reached out to several people at The Way that are in the African American community, that are in our community as well. And they've talked about how, it did hurt, and it's been something that has wounded them, and yeah, just a lot of pain that's represented there. And so we're going to be talking about that. And Feji, I just thank you for joining us. And the obvious elephant in the room is that, we're 3 white guys. And so we cannot give the perspective of what it's like to be a black man and to deal with and try to think through this from that perspective. And so, man, thank you for coming on and joining us and being willing to give us a perspective today. But I guess just starting out, what was your first response to seeing that video?
Yeah, my first initial response, kind of like most people, was definitely frustration, and anger. But honestly, I'd say to sum it up, it would be a lot of deep hurting. Because, it's like you said, seeing the footage, it was a guy who was seemingly minding his own business, and then out of nowhere, one thing led to another, and then, he's killed in cold blood. And, just kind of talking, seeing that, watching that, a lot of like mixed feelings were running through my mind. Like I said, the feelings that I mentioned, and then also like I went to, vent to other people about it. And, people just kind of, being there for me, like hearing me out. But what frustrated me the most was probably seeing that, despite the video clearly showing a man being killed in cold blood, there were people who were still rushing to, instead of like, sympathizing and like, trying to like, have a heart of compassion for the situation. There were people who wanted to know the story. What were all the events that happened? And, I think seeing things like that really upset me. as well as many others in the Black community. So first response is definitely frustration, but after talking to family, and then of course like really close friends, realizing later on, like, this is all like we're part of a broken world, and this, like, it goes deeper, like you said, like racism is something that's been around really since like the beginning of time. And well, even whether we want to call this racism or not, I mean, it was wrong, and it's a sin problem. And so having that understanding, that like this is something that's been around for a long time, and unfortunately, it may continue to be that way. But definitely a lot of frustration and bitterness, there.
Yeah, I think with this situation, we can pretty much guarantee that regardless of the outcome, like this was a racially motivated instance, and how deeply rooted that is. It's clear that this man was likely chased down and killed, whether it was for a citizen's arrest or whatever. Like this was a racially motivated thing, and I think that's why, for you as like my brother in Christ, I'm like I feel on your behalf as much as I can, because I think that deep down we know like something happened here that shouldn't be around today, but yet it still is.
Yeah, and I think that it's not that, and what I'm hearing you say, Fedge, it's not that people are saying, hey, yeah, we always want to know the facts for justice to come through. It's that's your first reaction. So a
Right.
young man is killed, and that's your first reaction is, oh, well, let's get the facts. And I think that it's problematic, and I see why that would be hurtful, for sure. So like for you, man, like I know that we talked about this a couple of days ago. What's it like for you as somebody who you said that you have been going on runs yourself? And I talked to another leader at the Way, who's also African American, and she said that it's changed her perspective when she goes on runs right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of it's one of those things where it's it's very unfortunate that something as simple as like running in your neighborhood, you kind of have to feel there has to be like a sense of like awareness for your surroundings whenever you do that. And one of the like, for example, like ever since that incident happened, like my parents were kind of sat me and my brothers down, me and my siblings, and they told us like don't make sure that whenever you decide to go running, or if you have to do any kind of outdoor exercise, make sure you're going in broad daylight at the hours where if anything were to happen, there would be people constantly going by to like see and perhaps have somebody intervene, as opposed to at night when there are less people around. And even like some of the yeah, so like typically even like there's a path that I used to take like when I was jogging, where I kind of like go through like quiet, like secluded areas, but just, and it's not like I'll never do that again, but it's just like depending on what time of day it is, that's something I have to now be mindful of, and that really should not be the case.
No.
But it is, unfortunately, as painful it is to say this, and for a lot of people to hear this, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I've just heard several different responses from several people at this point, and you're definitely representing a great majority of people that feel that way as well. And then which is crazy because I can speak for me, and I think I can speak for you too as well. But I've never experienced having to think about something like that.
No, the closest thing is your mom, dad saying, "Hey, watch, like don't approach strangers," and that's nothing compared to sadly what African Americans have to deal with in their own neighborhoods today.
Yeah, and so you mentioned the bitterness and the frustration, and you would say that that bitterness and frustration, is it primarily felt because just kind of calling a spade here, people from other ethnicities saying, oh, let's first get the facts? Is that where a lot of the bitterness and frustration is on this specific case?
Um, yeah, yeah, like you said, calling a spade, I'd have to agree. And just and also just kind of seeing like how I feel like I feel like collectively as like a nation, I feel like we've come to a degree we've become kind of dismissive about these things because we've seen so many of these documented cases of uh, black men unarmed being harmed whether by law enforcement or any other or by any other means. And we've seen so many of these that I feel like, or black men or women, for that matter. But we've seen so many of them that people are just kind of like, it's almost like people are seeing it as, oh, it's just another one of those cases, and it's like these are people who are losing their lives.
Hmm.
Like losing life is a big deal, but it's come to the like we've seen so many of them that people are starting to be more dismissive about it.
Yeah.
And it's very unfortunate, but that's the reality.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw, I think it was three different ministers that are African American ministers that are friends with me on social media. A couple of them that I've talked with many times. But I don't know if y'all saw this post, but it was a post that was going around and it said, "Black people are so tired. We can't go jogging. We can't relax in the comfort of our homes." And every single one of these statements has a hashtag name at the end of it from a situation that happened from an African American who lost their life. We can't ask for help after being in a car crash. We can't have a cell phone. We can't leave a party to get to safety. We can't play loud music. We can't sell CDs. We can't sleep. Ayanna Jones is the one there. We can't walk from the corner store. We can't play cops and robbers. We can't go to church, which is hashtag the Charleston shooting there. We can't walk home with Skittles. Trayvon Martin. We can't hold a hairbrush while leaving our own bachelor party. Sean Bell. We can't party on New Year's. Oscar Grant. We can't get a normal traffic ticket. Sandra Bland. We can't lawfully carry a weapon. Philando Castile. We can't break down on a public road with car problems. Corey Jones. We can't shop at Walmart. And I mean, it goes on, and that's page one, and it's 2 pages.
That's insane.
And so, yeah, when you say that, Warren, I reached out to him, and he said, the saddest part about all this, and to quote him exactly, he said the worst part about all this is there's nothing abnormal about it in the country. Almost feels seasonal, is what he said. And
Yeah.
and so I'm sure that you feel some of that as well.
Yeah, and Veggie, hearing all those, I'm sure a lot of them you're well aware of. It would be reasonable to kind of hear all that, and to, if you are an African American, to almost feel inclined to almost live in fear in some instances. For you, how does this kind of change the way that you feel like you have to carry yourself? I mean, do you feel like you in some ways just kind of have to just deal with it, or do you specifically do things when you're out and about? Hearing all those things, how does that cause you to live? What does that change for you?
Yeah, it's like I said, whenever these things, specifically like some of the most like some of the more popular cases that hit like the top of the news headlines, like Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, you know, cases like that, instances like that have come up. Like our parents have had to sit us down. In other various like police brutality cases, they'll tell us like, hey, this is how they'll we literally have to sit down and they'll tell us like, this is how you handle a situation, like any situation, if a cop pulls you over for any reason, whether it's for just an ordinary speeding ticket or anything of that sort. Anytime they tell us like, this is how you should treat this situation, or this is how you should handle yourself in this situation when it comes to police officers. And I've explained that to some of my non-African American friends, and then a lot of the times when I sit there and I tell them that, and they're just kind of like they can't. Their mind is blown. They're like, wow, like I can't believe like you have to, take like these levels of precaution. And it's like, well, yeah, because again, it's the sad truth and the reality of the society that we live in. You know,
Yeah.
And so let me ask you this: so, what would you counsel someone that was, an African American Black person that was really dealing with a lot of bitterness and some rage and so on and so forth? How would you counsel that person struggling with that kind of bitterness about these issues?
you know, I would I would do as much as I can. Of course, God willing to, kind of show them love, and, get them to, understand like not everyone that's not African American is like that, and just kind of like pointing them to, good, figures or like role models who one particular role model that I mean, we have a holiday after him, but Martin Luther King, I feel like he would be, the prime example. No matter how he was treated, he ultimately he stood his ground, and he was all about making sure that people were treated on the basis of their character, like who they were as people, as opposed to what they looked like.
Yeah.
Regardless of who they were, he didn't treat a white person any differently than he treated a black person. And you know even like just pointing them to like good role models, in today's society, but ultimately, and then pointing them to scripture, because I feel like that's the most important thing, that can really, like they say, like as humans, we can treat our wounds, but the true healing comes from Christ. And so like it doesn't matter like what kind of hurt, regardless of the kind of hurt that they're experiencing. I think ultimately, pointing them, to what the Bible says, and being a good example, leading by example, in the case of, dealing with the bitterness towards non-African American, or any particular race that may be dealing with a bitterness towards another. I feel like showing them the example of Christ, and then providing like a modern day example of someone who's risen above that. I feel like is the best way to, that's how I would approach counseling
Yeah.
someone in that situation.
And I think that is a key thought that, not I would encourage to refrain from painting, I'll just say white people because I am white, but all white people with a broad brush, because like William Wilberforce was a huge he was a huge factor in getting whenever Africans were on slave ships. He to stop that. William Wilberforce was a huge factor in that. Charles Spurgeon called out slavery repeatedly, and people whenever they owned slaves in the South, they actually hated him. They did not like him. They had like burnings where they would burn the pamphlets that he was putting out against slavery. And he's another white man. Charles Spurgeon called out racism adamantly, and so. There are people that are wanting to, and it's not because for us it's a biblical issue, right? It's a understanding humanity, understanding how we view people in general.
Well,
But
I think what you said about I think specifically about MLK is that, and this needs to be applied to all people across the board, is treating people, on the basis of their character, not their skin color. Mm-hmm. So like, I'm not gonna look at any other race or my own race even and go, oh, well, I've got to associate them with this or that. It's like, no, I need to just look at them for who they are and their actions and their words and their heart. And then ultimately, like you said, as believers, we look at people as like, man, like this person is made in the image of God. And that is something that for believers, that makes us all one in Christ. And so I think that I love that, though, treating people on the basis of their character and viewing them that way versus, oh, well, they're African American, so they must be this, or oh, they're white, so they must be like this. And there's just like, no, I don't even. Maybe you don't even know the person, and I think that's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
That where a lot of racism is still alive today is because we look at someone and we go, oh, he is this color or she is this color, so they must be doing this, or I wonder if they're going to do this. And it's like, no, man, like that is not how we
Yeah.
view people, and that's why racism is still alive today.
And so, Fed, you remember whenever we baptized Leah and like the whole Nigerian church came, and it was the night I was talking about racism. and so I'm like, I was already nervous as this white guy that's about to try to tackle this issue. I mean, I have a Bible in my hands, but I'm still very nervous about it. And then I have this, I mean, literally it was like 2 or 3 rows of people that were part of this Nigerian church here in Lubbock that came to see a girl get baptized.
Tree of Restoration Church,
Yeah,
I think is
yeah,
that church.
TOR, and so, but I had conversations with them after that night, and I mean, I think Trevor was there with one of them, but I've talked with several of them, and they said, hey, you know, that actually brought a lot of healing, and we talked about that after. One of the girls that we baptized later that semester, she was baptized at the Way. She said that after we left that night, we talked about how, you know, maybe we need to experience a little bit more healing than we thought we have, because I realize now that God wanted to speak to me about that. And that was just such a crazy God moment that the one time, I mean, I've not to just tackle only that issue. And then that night,
Right.
an African church comes in to join us. That was not planned at all.
Yeah.
But that brought a lot of healing
Yeah.
from, and I think it was 3 conversations I had with people that said that brought healing for them.
Well, and I think the biggest thing is that it almost seems like the super important thing that, you know, that a white person can do. Like if you're listening to this and you're white, like the 3 of us are, is I think the reality is that racism is still a thing. It's come a long way, but it's still here. And as a white man, I can actually choose to pretend like it isn't a thing. Because it doesn't personally affect me, I can act as though it isn't a thing, and I can kind of disregard it. And when these instances come up a few times a year, which is way too many, it should be 0. I can pretend like it isn't a thing, and I think so. The most important thing we can do is to acknowledge it and to talk about it, and to not try to write it off for something else, and to not deflect it and be like, oh, well, let's talk about black on black crime. It's like, no. Let's talk about the actual issue that's happening. Maybe that is an issue too, but let's talk about this issue of racism. And I think that's the biggest thing is we need to talk about it and not disregard it if it doesn't affect us.
And that's why we're doing this podcast, and why we wanted Feji you to come and join us is because we want to listen.
Yeah, and going to that bitterness and resentment is kind of what we're talking about here. And I know we had talked a couple days ago, Feji, about the way you felt when you saw that video. And there's going to be bitterness, there's going to be resentment, and we also should continue to seek justice through that because that's so important. And so you had mentioned when we talked to you about that. Hey, now I can see you. How's it going? You had mentioned, some of the feelings that you had, and I echoed some of those feelings, and I'm sure there wasn't even close to what you felt, but you mentioned you felt angry and sick was the word you used, and I think that's a great way to define kind of what I felt too. Watching that video was just sick, and I mean I was on the couch. And I can remember showing Megan too, and like I literally wanted to throw up because of the injustice that had happened, and that's okay to have those feelings, and we should have those feelings, and what do you think about that as well as it pertains to dealing with bitterness and resentment in a biblical way, like you talked about, but also seeking justice?
So there were, as far as justice went, you know, kind of like the details of the incident, knowing that this was something that happened like 2 months ago, roughly. It was like sometime in February. And, you know, clearly all the time, you know, through the month of April went by and nothing was really done about it. And so that's when, you know, famous like figureheads, you know, like I'm sure y'all have heard of Sean King before, who were essentially, you know, at the forefront of, you know, racially motivated crimes against the Black community. He, you know, was one of the people who was like, okay, like educating people, like posting this story, you know, sharing the story out there for as many people as possible to hear. Pretty much like forcing it to make headlines and at least to get the attention that it deserved. Because prior to that was something, you know, clearly for a few months that was not the case. And so as far as like, what can we do, to seek justice on such issues. I feel like, we're given a platform of social media, and, in any and every way that we can, raise awareness, to such issues, and it doesn't only just have to be, of course, uh, you know, um, like towards discrimination. It can be, or like black on white discrimination. It can be anything, like any issue where people are just being wrongly or unfairly or unjustly treated. We have these platforms, for a reason. I mean, it's great, to like post about, what's going on in your life. I mean, it's nice to keep people updated and also see what's going on in the lives of your friends and family. But I feel like, using social media is very key and critical, and I feel like people don't really see just how powerful of a tool that it can be as far as, bringing justice. It was literally through social media, that this case of Ahmaud Arbery got the attention that it needed for so long. So I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
using that platform
Well,
I
is
think you're
very, very
absolutely
important.
right.
I think just a verse that I thought of that I think applies to just this idea of justice and what we can do is Micah 6:8. It says, "He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." And so, literally, like one of those key things that the Lord requires of us to do what is good is to do justice. And so, I think that like you said, we do have platforms of social media. We have churches that we're involved in, and friend groups that we have, and so in everything that we do, we want to seek justice. And so, because God is a just God, He also has righteous anger as well. And so, I
Right.
think that when we see these situations happen, the anger is just.
Right. And I think that same example of righteous anger, that there might be more, but the only one that I think that Jesus shows in the Bible is the tables, right? But in that
Yeah.
instance, what was Jesus' first priority? Was it to say, "Hey, we need to really address like the bitterness and resentment of this guy"? But no, he was like, "Hey, this is injustice. We need to correct this, and then we can talk about how we heal from it afterwards." But when you see that evil being done, when you see that injustice being done, that anger and sickness, that you kind of feel is an okay thing.
Yeah, that's
Christ
in the character
felt
of
that.
God.
Yeah. And obviously, we don't want to stay on that. We want to move away from that, but we can't look at evil and say, "Oh, that's fine." We have to call it what it is and seek justice.
And I think the reality is right now we have to realize that we are not yet in a place where we can move away from this because there's still injustice happening, and
Absolutely.
so we still need to be doing justice.
Well, and that's another question I wanted to bring up. But I would say for a closing thought on the bitterness and holding on to that, like I completely agree. That emotion that you feel is not a negative thing per se. It's what you do with that emotion, and
Sure.
so you can have
Right.
that anger drive you to godly action because emotion's meant to drive us to action. So
Right.
that stirring inside you is meant to drive you to action. It can be a godly action or a sinful one, and our prayer is that God will take hold of that and help us be more like Jesus, turning over the tables.
Right.
He still took some pretty intense action, but it was a godly one, obviously. And so I think that's a great model to
Yeah.
look at. But there are people. So this is an election year, right? And I have heard it said, and people have mentioned this, is that these kinds of things, guys, it's all a political ploy. That's what this is. This is all a political ploy. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that idea, that racism isn't a real thing. It's all being used for politics.
Yeah. Yeah, I think definitely um, famous figureheads that, go on air and say things like that. I feel like they're part of the issue. I mean, just keeping it real. I think, that's part of that right there is part of the problem. Because, there, whenever you come into a position of quote unquote fame, there are, people who will take what you say at face value and they'll take it to the bank. And so when you say things like that, you'll have people who, who don't really like relate or aren't quite in those shoes. And they will, begin to think like it's not a big deal, or, they'll even get irritated, and like say like, things like they'll just run with the wrong narrative altogether, and it's not fair. It definitely isn't fair to the people who are being affected, by said issue. But
Right.
unfortunately, that it's just, again, it's just one of those realities, that we have to deal with. But all in all, I like, as it can be very frustrating. But at the end of the day,
Yeah, it's not.
yeah.
I agree.
And
It's,
they're called influencers for a reason, you know.
well, and it's not just a political ploy, because I mean my own experience from what I've seen and people that I'm close with, but with my own eyes, I was at a youth camp as a student at the youth camp, and I watched these guys come out on stage to their a rap group that was there, and they were black guys, and one of them was wearing a shirt that said Jesus was not a white man. And so he was wearing this shirt, and I saw a full youth group of like 50 to 70 students and their leaders get up and walk out as this guy's shirt was clearly seen by everybody. And it was very, very clear why they got up and walked out, so much so that the speaker the next day, which I thought this was just hilarious and awesome at the same time. He came out on stage that morning, and he was wearing the guy's shirt. So he was now wearing the whole day. He wore the shirt that said Jesus was not a white man, and he was this tall, lanky white man that was preaching.
And
at the
newsflash:
camp.
Jesus was not a white man. If
a
you
white
didn't know
man.
that, he
Yes.
wasn't white.
Yes, we love to create Jesus and make him just like ourselves, and at the end of that. At the end of that road, we find that we are actually trying to be our own God,
Right.
And so, and that's just applies to a lot of different things than not just race and racism issues.
Yeah.
But I experienced that. My little brother in our fraternity talked to me about how there's places where his wife is white and he's black, and said that he has felt nervous holding her hand in different places that he's went. And he talked about how he had to get special training from his parents as well. How do you respond to a cop when you get pulled over? And he gave some very specific details that I never had a conversation like that as a white guy. But his parents had to take him through that, so that way they made sure he was not going to get himself in a situation that was a really bad one. And so that this is just him sharing with me. This is just what he told me. My sister, my niece is half black. And so my half sister and my niece Desiree, she said, my sister said that she was neglected by a bulk of our family, not the family that's on my blood side, but on hers. She said that she was neglected by a bulk of the family because my niece is black, and so to tell me that this is not an issue for today, I'm just like, well, that's my experience, and I could keep on going.
Yeah.
I could keep on going. I have a couple others written down that I'm just not going to share for time's sake here, but I think it is an issue today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, to say it's not is just, you've got to either be living under a rock or like on a secluded island. Because, I mean, I grew up in East Texas, and there's evidence all around of it there. And I know there are some places, I think we talked about this a couple days ago, there are some places where you might not see it as much. But I think everywhere you go, you're going to see evidence of some sort of racism, whether it's white and black people or, you know, Hispanics, Asians, whoever.
I think that just the big thing is don't choose to remain naive. Like I think that when your eyes are open to it and you admit to yourself like this is a thing, that you're gonna see it more often. And like I know for me, like it became in high school, it became just very real because and I shared about this with you the other day, but. I was leaving, so I think it was my junior or senior year, but we were leaving campus during our lunchtime to go get lunch. Like, we're not supposed to leave, but we left, I think, to go get like Chipotle or something. But my friend drove, and he was African American, and he was speeding down Carrier, which is one of the main streets in Grand Prairie. And he got pulled over, and man, like my friend is like, man, like clean as a whistle, like nothing. There's literally like just no reason whatsoever to be suspicious of him. Like he should have just got the speeding ticket and not a big deal. But the cop actually made him get out of the car, and he like patted my friend down as I sat in the passenger seat, and it was just the most bizarre experience because it was just literally, I've been pulled over for like 10 speeding tickets, and I've never been patted down before or asked to get out of the car. And my friend kind of got back in the car, and like at the time, I didn't really know what to say, or and he was like, he's like, like it's not a big deal. He's like, it's okay. And so just experiencing that, I was like, wow, like this cop just made him get out of the car and patted him down straight up because he's black. Like he didn't make me get out of the car and pat me down too, and I was with him.
Right.
And so that was like kind of one of the first times that I really just saw a example of racism that could not be written off or justified. It was just very straightforward. And so, I've experienced that and through my friend, and that was just like a very eye-opening moment for me. And so, yeah, it can't be ignored,
And so Lecrae, I think probably the most well-known Christian rapper that in evangelical circles, he has a song called "Facts," and I want to read just a few lyrics. And I don't know if you've heard this song, Veggie, but I wanted to see your response to it. He says, "Oh man, now they acting like I'm suddenly political. Told me shut my mouth and get my checks from evangelicals. Where my mama raised me on Angela and Eldris, Chuck Berry made it, but the credit went to Elvis. No, you never knew that. No, you think I'm too black. I just think I'm real. I just think I'm too real. I grew up on Tupac, but I think he actually says Tupac to make it rhyme. Sure. You grew up thinking that the Panthers were some terrorists. I grew up hearing how they fed my mama eggs and grits. They say, Cray, you so divisive, shouldn't be a black church. I say, do the math. Segregation started that first. Hey, you want unity? Then read a eulogy. Kill the power that exists up under you and over me. I said, you want unity? Then read a eulogy. Kill the power that exists up under you and over me. Facts. And then it says, so reconciliation and conciliation requires defrauded parties to be made whole, not just apologizing for the offense.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep. But I mean, yeah, that's his reality, and that's the reality that many of us face, growing up.
Yeah, I heard that song and I was like, first of all, that he's like coming in hot with it, right? Like that's like intense. Like there's no
I'd say there's a bit of righteous anger there.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that Lecrae, when he started talking about these issues, he lost white evangelical support. I don't know if y'all knew that,
yeah,
but he lost a lot of white evangelical support for even questioning that these things are happening. And so he, obviously in this song, he's sharing a bit of that frustration. But I think he does point out what we call, or what has been called, like white privilege, right? And so he's saying there's a power that exists up under us and over others. And so to a certain extent, I think that we've got to recognize, like, I've not been pulled over and asked to get out of the car. Trevor wasn't asked to get out of the car that day. And there is an extent that there is white privilege, man. And and so I think that's what he's talking about there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple of people, friends of friends, things like that on Facebook that comment like, man, I just don't understand what white privilege means. Like, I live in the same house you do, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, there's a different type of perspective that we as white people just can't understand.
Yeah.
I mean, Veggie, like you talked about, you had to sit down with your folks and they had to line you through how to talk to a cop. And all my dad ever said was be respectful. And that's all he had to say, I mean, to be pulled out of your car just because you were speeding. And I think, Veggie, maybe you should share about that time you talked about a while back where you were just waiting outside your friend's house and the cop came up and asked for your ID.
Yeah, I was out. So my friend and I, we were just, getting ready to. This was the summer before our freshman year, before we started college, and we were just we were gonna do one of his coaches for the college he was about to go to send him a workout. So we were just gonna go do that together at our local high school. And I was just out waiting on him. I told him I was there, and then along comes this constable. I was, out in front of his house. I had my hazard lights on to indicate to other cars to like, don't wait on me, like go around me. And then like, he sees me, he like locks eye contact with me as he's going by. So I just kind of wave, like acknowledging that he's there. And then he makes a U-turn and then pulls up behind me and then gets out of his truck and he's like, is everything okay? And I was like, yeah, like, is there a problem? And then he asks for my driver's license and registration. And at this point, this was when documentation and like black brutality or police brutality against blacks was starting to like peak in news headlines. So, and this was recently after our parents had a sit down conversation with us. So, just kind of following protocol. I didn't want to do anything that would put me, or my friend, or potentially my friend who was about to step out of the house. I didn't want to do anything that would put either one of us, in trouble or in danger. So I just went ahead and complied with him, gave him the stuff. Of course, I also wasn't concerned, clean record. There was nothing on me, no reason to be, concerned, even if he did run me through the system. So I gave it to him, and then he came back, and just out of curiosity, I asked him. I was like, so like, what was the reason for that? I'm just curious. And then he said something like false advertising. He made something up. Definitely, he clearly made something up, and
Right.
I was just, I was upset, but at that point, I was like, again, I don't want to. I don't want to be another statistic,
Right.
so I just I let it ride. And then my buddy comes out of the house and then, he sees the cop pulling away and he's like, is everything okay? And I was just kind of like, yeah, it was nothing. It was one of those things that it's unfortunate, but, I think at some point, being a black male in America, you deal with that
Yeah.
at some point.
Now, obviously, we're not in the same place that we were decades ago.
Sure. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, well, yeah, we've even had an
has been made.
African American president. I mean, so like obviously,
Yeah.
we are not in that place anymore. But to say that it no longer exists, I think is a little bit
Right.
It's a little bit silly, and I think that we just don't realize how that it hasn't been that long since all this segregation and stuff was happening. And I saw this post a little while back, but it said, as your kids start school again, tell them about Ruby Bridges, the first black child at all-white public elementary school in the South. Sunday was Ruby's birthday. She's only 65 years old.
Yeah, I mean that's my parents' age.
So let's not pretend that this was hundreds of years ago. It's like, no, like there's people alive today that were in the middle of whenever there were massive leaps and bounds being taken. But
Sure.
certainly they wouldn't have said, oh, hey, see, look, there's a black girl at an all-white school. Racism's no longer a thing, right?
Well, we
That's
can't
not
go
the
like,
case.
oh, like we had a black president, so man, can y'all just stop talking about it now? Like it's like y'all got what you wanted, and it's like no, like that's literally like that. Obviously, that isn't it. Like we are not ready to move on from this issue yet, and I just think that has got to be said over and over again. Is we are not ready to move on because the issue hasn't stopped.
For the Christian, it goes back to God's word. And this isn't just, and we're talking about one specific place where this is happening, but in the Middle East, there's a lot of racism that happens. Lots of between the Israelites and the Iranians, and there's all kinds of tension. Palestinians with the Israelites there, and so as a Christian, I also don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see people hating each other just because they're different, what we would call different race and different ethnicities is probably a better term, but in all this, how does the Bible address this current issue? How does the Bible address this? And we've shared a couple of scriptures, Jesus flipping over the table, Micah 6:8. We want to see justice.
Revelation 7, chapter 7, verse 9, I think is one that just people need to understand or hear. It says, and this is Revelation. So this is what we are leading up to. This is what God desires, and is what's going to happen. And it says in verse 9, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and all peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands. And so every tribe, every nation, every people, every language. And so heaven and the kingdom of God is literally every possible race, language, tribe, nation, all together as one, united under God and with God in Christ. And so I think that is so important to understand, that literally that racism is against the very heart, nature, and character of God. And that's so important to know.
And just on that verse alone, you see that heaven is definitely a white supremacist hell.
That's true. Yeah.
Because he's all kinds of different ethnicities all around
Mixed
you.
in. Yeah. And it's not like you're going to see like, okay, here's the white section, here's the Hispanic section. It's like, no, we're all mixed together, and that's how it's supposed to be.
And the reason why we're all going to be together is because all people, Genesis 1:27, all people are made in the image of God, is what Scripture teaches us about humanity. And the reason why I say I said that ethnicity might be a better term to actually use, I know it's splitting hairs a bit, but biblically there's only one race, the human race. Yeah. Biblically, to understand like what we're saying there, we're saying that there's people, period. And a person, no matter what color, red, yellow, black, white, they're all precious in his sight. That's the little nursery rhyme that many people learn whenever they're little, and I agree with it. I think that it's true. But racism happened, Scripture addressing this too, racism happens because of sin. And like you said, Veggie, you said, man, ultimately it's because of sin. So racism, Genesis 3, the world falls and sin enters the world in that moment. And God did not design it to be that way. But racism at its core is a sin problem, not a skin problem, is how it's been said. And that's just a true statement. It's very true.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then Ephesians chapter 2, verses 11 through 16, talks about how God reconciled us to himself and to each other. And he's going to use Gentiles and Jews, which there was a lot of tension between those two groups. And Jews really kind of saw themselves as having the upper hand, and so much so that Gentiles couldn't even go, and we would all be Gentiles, by the way. So that would, all of us would be in that category. Gentiles could not go into certain places in the temple of worship, because those are only for God's chosen people, which were the Jews, right? And so Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11, starting there and going to verse 16 says, "Therefore, remember that at one time you Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision." So there's two parties. Jews call themselves circumcision. Gentiles are called the uncircumcision by them, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenant of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility. And so there is this division, this dividing wall, but because of Jesus, we now have that wall is crashing to the ground, and we can actually be unified and be one. And so God reconciled us all to himself, and we can be reconciled to each other. And that's why I believe that racial reconciliation is a gospel issue, and it's an issue that needs to happen in the church. And we got to be talking about it because it's on God's heart. Because that's what the gospel does. It unites. It unites. So,
and I was looking at some verses, and one that particularly stuck out to me was Acts 10:34 through 35, and it talks about like God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. So if God sees an individual that is of a different ethnicity than me, but fears him and is considered acceptable, to God, then why would I not be accepting of the same individual? On what basis do I have to not accept that person?
Yeah, exactly. And then the call to, like you talked about, Trevor, just that call to justice, that the church should be on the front line of justice issues. You know, Micah 6:8, Amos 5:24. That's
and
one.
Jesus reiterates it, I believe, in when he's talking to the Pharisees.
Yeah.
He actually kind of quotes, or it's believed that he's quoting from Micah 6:8, and he talks
Yeah.
about that. We know that Jesus certainly wanted justice.
For sure.
For sure. And in Amos it says, and I think that MLK Jr., he was known for quoting this one, let justice roll down like the waters, right? Like that was something that you hear a lot in different sermons, different things that he's talking about, especially when it comes to this issue. Let justice roll down like waters. And I think that's our prayer. That's my prayer. That is my prayer for this case that we are talking about now. And that's my prayer for all of them. God, let your justice reign.
Right, right.
The church has got to be on the front line of justice issues. And so with that, as we close, what can we do? It's talking about justice, and that's action, right? We're taking action. What can we do? And I know that we've mentioned a couple things, but kind of reiterating those.
Yeah. Definitely. I think opportunities that, we have to raise awareness, we should definitely do that. I think, we talked the other day, and one thing that you said that really kind of hit home with me, regarding issues of injustice is, not saying anything is saying something, so, especially as Christians, we need to be, at the forefront, of these issues, because a lot of people will look and ask, like, okay, like, what's the church doing about this? And so if the church is being silent about a particular issue, people could, interpret that as it's okay. And that's the last thing we want to, that's the furthest thing that we want to do. So definitely speaking up, when we're prompted with the opportunity to do so. And then, another thing that I mentioned, whenever, as far as like, first responses went to this whole thing that I really appreciated was, a lot of my non-African American friends reaching out to me and like, saying, hey, brother, like they, first of all, clearing the air that, that there's no way that they could possibly, understand what it's like, to walk in our shoes. But, also like making it a point to communicate, like, that doesn't mean like, I'm still here for you. We still love you. If there's any and everything that they can do, to, show support, for the cause, and stand up against, such injustices, they're willing to do so, and that like meant the world to me, I know, Travis, you said that you went ahead, and you went on to, talk to people both on leadership and off leadership, just pretty much all your African American community that you knew. And I think, speaking on this issue, people will appreciate that a lot. I think, it's something that I also mentioned God's been working on me. Whenever there's like a particular issue, that any kind of issue that you may have with someone and you feel prompted to speak up, I think it's better to say something than to not say anything, because I think saying something shows the person that you care, and it may mean more to them than you could possibly realize. Like in my case, like having the numerous people that reached out, it really meant a lot to me, because, the reality is when things like this happen, like it's a possibility, for people to start to think that, okay, like every white person's like that, when in fact every white person is not like that, or, in a case of like, let's say like, black people, attacking, like a white person in like a black neighborhood, we also don't want, white people saying, okay, every black person's like that, And so I think, speaking out when prompted with the opportunity, and reaching out to people who are affected, by such a thing are ways that we can do something about it.
Yeah.
Another big thing, for Christians, what our first response should be is not to jump to conclusions, but to jump to compassion. And an example I can think of is like if you see a car wreck, or rather if you come upon a car wreck, and you run up to go help that person, is your first reaction to be like, oh, was this person at fault? And it's like, maybe I shouldn't help them, blah, blah, blah. Or is your first response to be like, I need to call 911 and I need to help this person? No matter what happened there, you see what happened, like the effects of it.
Yeah.
And you've got to show compassion first instead of jumping to those conclusions. And then second, just like we said, the biggest thing that we can do, as people that aren't African American, is listen and show support for those brothers and sisters that are affected by this. You know.
Yeah. And like just being a little vulnerable, it was from the conversation that we had a couple of days ago that I told you this, Veggie, you made me a better pastor in that conversation, saying that, hey, reaching out to people and just saying, hey, like I'm hurting with you, and I love you. That goes a really long way, and so that's what I'm going to do from now on whenever these kinds of things happen, because I do care about. One, I care about you. I love you. You're my brother in Christ. I think that you know that. Like that's not just like, and we've talked about that even a couple of days ago. Like we're close around this table, and really care about you, man. And so people that I love, I want them to know that, and to just go ahead and voicing that. It's not one of the things I said was, does it make it awkward? Does it make a weird tension? And you said, man, not really. It really encourages. And so from now on, I will always reach out to people that are in my life that I know that could be wounded by such things. And all of us should be hurting, but specifically African-American community that would be hurting in a very unique way from those things. And so, man, it made me a better pastor. And so if you haven't reached out to somebody that's your friend, I would encourage you to do so.
Yeah. So I think, we got to acknowledge it. We've got to have compassion. We've got to listen, and then we've got to seek justice on it. And we need to be. I think the church needs to be at the forefront of that.
And remember, on using your voice, Martin Luther King Jr. He was obviously he's the main person people think about, especially from recent history. And what did he do? He preached.
Yeah.
He shared a message. And so using your voice is powerful.
Absolutely.
Like you said, Veggie, I agree. And I think that those things, Trevor, they're so key. So, man, Veggie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank y'all for having me.
We're going to segue a little bit into a totally unrelated topic of discussion, Elon Musk.
Current events is what we're transitioning to.
Yeah. He's not. I don't know that he's a racist, but we're not talking about it for that reason.
the valuable discussion.
I think that Elon Musk would probably say he likes technology over humanity.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
Based on his kid's name alone.
I think he's humanist. He'd rather have a robot.
Well, he believes that we're in a simulation. So
yes.
There's that.
Again, like when they asked him, when Joe Rogan asked him about like why the name that you gave to your kid, he started talking about AIs. So if that doesn't say anything, I mean, I don't know what does.
He's looking at Joe Rogan like, I know you're supposed to ask me this question because it's in your programming.
Yeah,
but
it's like what? It's like, is it like XAE12 or something? Is like his name?
So
his son's name.
So here's the thing, though. When you're his son, so someone comes up to you and is like, "God, your name's so weird." He's like, "Oh, my dad owns your dad's company."
He doesn't yet. What is it? Exxon? Okay, Dad, will you buy Exxon real quick?
Where is it that you work? Well, you don't work there anymore.
Yeah.
Like, Elon Musk has some serious power behind him, man.
Yeah, he literally strong-armed the government of California.
Which was great, by the way. I thought that was such a
California was
move.
saying, like, California was trying to shut him down, and he literally was like, okay, well, if you're going to shut me down, I'm going to take my whole company and move it to, like, Texas or somewhere like that. And they were like, oh, no, it's okay. You can stay open.
Can you imagine having that much power? Like, so we get called by Greg Abbott, and he's like, hey, don't do that. And you're like, I'm going to do it. And if you don't want me to do it, you can come arrest me. But if you arrest me, I'm moving from Texas. And he literally was like, okay, you can go ahead and do it. I'm not going to come and arrest you.
Who's really in charge there at that point?
Well, and it happened with all the sports teams in California too. So like the whatever the governor's name is, like Gavin Newsom or whatever, he was saying like no live sports until like 2021.
35.
Jeez.
And then but then all of the major sports teams in California were like, okay, well we'll go and we'll take our franchises and we'll go and play in other states. And he's like, oh no, JK, June 1st, y'all can start playing. That just happened like a couple of days ago.
It's like, bro, your bank account's going to be super empty if you keep on.
That's crazy.
The only reason why people live in California is like the weather and sports, and that's literally it.
There.
There's no other reason to live in California.
I'll tell you what, Megan and I thankfully.
Hey man,
and the
I'm
money.
just saying I am a Texan through and through.
Well,
Greatest,
yeah.
It is the
100%.
greatest country in the world, as I say it.
When Megan and I went there, in January, thankfully before the outbreak, the place we stayed in was like so small, and it was just like this is a normal house. And because we stayed at an Airbnb.
Did y'all? I don't know if y'all knew this. This is a real thing. So in San Francisco, it's actually legal to use the restroom in the streets.
Oh yeah,
And there's an app. There's an actual app that you can download that will tell you where poop is at in the streets.
Oh my gosh.
That's
I
how,
will
that's
say
how
this.
dirty it is.
I will
Dude,
say
that's a-
this.
that's
We
a-
walked downtown. I never saw any, so I don't know if they just got some great street sweepers or
But
I
there's
don't.
an app. There's an app that will tell you where it's at to avoid it.
But yeah, when we got there, our Airbnb hosts were like, "Hey, just watch for poop on the sidewalk."
Yeah.
That's really a crappy situation, am I right? Listen, hey,
He really dunged that,
There's a
didn't
whole
he?
there's a whole nother way to say that I'm on a winning streak. Means something different there, I think.
That's bad.
Yeah. San Francisco is a weird place.
So you can poop on the side of the road?
Yeah.
And they have porta potties.
And you can- yeah.
It's like, why don't you just use that?
And you can legally be like naked in San Francisco and walk around, and they like won't arrest you.
I think it's because of the homeless population
Yeah.
they tried to do that, but I think there's
Basically
better
just made
ways than
things
just
worse.
saying
They're
poop on the
essentially just
sidewalk.
enabling it.
Yeah.
San Francisco is weird. It's a weird
That's
place.
disgusting.
Not like I have all the answers.
It's a
and
cool
things.
place to go and visit, but you're gonna have to deal with
Yeah,
some weird
visit
stuff.
for sure. It's beautiful, man,
Yeah.
but don't stay there too long.
Just don't breathe in too deep.
Go sing the Full House theme song in front of the
Don't trip.
Full House. And you'll be
Don't
fine.
trip on the sidewalk when you're walking down the street.
You're like, hey, a dog pooped here. No, it didn't.
Oh man.
What would y'all do? Like, what would you do if you...
Even a dog
I-
has the decency to go in the grass. You know?
What
Yeah.
would you do, though, if you were walking down the street and saw someone drop
Just
their
go
pants
right there.
and literally just drop a turd?
I asked some people while I was there, I was like, have you seen anybody? He said, yeah, there was this homeless lady in front of me, just squat right there in front. Like, we're just all walking, and we just had to walk around her. And it's just what it is.
Yeah.
Golly.
Crazy.
That stinks, am I right?
Veggie's about to, log off right now. I can't take one more of these.
Oh man, I've been more disturbed than I have been in recent weeks. I'll say that much.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll ever go to San Francisco.
Yeah.
I don't think.
No, you should go just for a couple of days.
Yeah.
Would it be a
limit the
pretty
trip.
warm welcome? I mean,
It is. I mean, I'll tell you, the weather was beautiful. We went to Sausalito, and it's just gorgeous. But, yeah, you don't want to stay there too long.
Yeah, I hear the welcome's about 98.6 degrees when it comes out. Pretty warm.
That's a stretch.
Dang.
Really.
Typing up, what is the body temperature of poop when it comes out?
All right. I think I'm out.
That's the last thing we'll talk about right there.
Yeah.
I'm
We
all I'm all gassed out, guys.
That's
You
how we
get it?
digested
Get it?
that
I'm all
topic
gassed
long
out.
enough.
We apologize if you're still listening at this point and you've heard those jokes. I'm sorry.
Man.
Yeah, hey, let's clear the air.
Actually, we can close on a different current event. With all of this shutdown,
Clear the air.
the air actually has cleared up. So, like in Los
Hey,
Angeles,
There we go.
Notoriously, when you fly
High
into
five.
Los
High
Angeles,
five.
there's been like a smog in the air, like where you would fly in and the whole city is literally brown,
And it's not poop.
completely clear, and it's not. Yeah, and so like all this shutdown actually has been really good for the planet. It's like the same thing like in India, I believe like the air has cleared up. Like there's like lots of other places where like vegetation is growing where it hasn't grown in a long time. It's pretty crazy. So there's been some benefits for the planet, which makes me wonder like maybe like how I'm not gonna get into it.
Yeah. We can talk
Like
about that
global
too.
warming is like such a massive issue, but it takes 2 months for it to like clear up.
Well, I don't know that global warming stops,
Well, but,
but
like,
the
the
smog
emissions in
stops.
the air and stuff
Well,
is like-
the CO2 you can't see.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just gonna
It's
stay
just I don't
there.
know. It's crazy how fast the Earth can recover. It's like God created the Earth to sustain itself.
And asked us to take care of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But hey, Fedgy, man, thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining us.
really
dude.
appreciate it.
So,
yeah, of course. Thank y'all so much.
Cool. All right, guys. We'll be back again here in a couple weeks.
Yep. See y'all next time.
All right, y'all take care.
Later, bro.